Welcome to the People's Health Briefing, a component of the Trusted Voices campaign. I'm Dr. Nahab Alada from Roots Community Health Center, reporting for the week of August 23rd, 2021. As health professionals rooted in Oakland, serving some of the people most vulnerable to getting and suffering from COVID-19, we are here to cut through the noise to give you information you can use to make choices that will keep you, your loved ones, and your community as safe as possible. The goal of the People's Health Briefing is to empower you with our best knowledge and thinking every Tuesday morning. Alameda County now has 104,859 COVID cases and 1,309 deaths. This represents an increase of about 3,000 cases and 7 deaths since I reported last week. In terms of vaccination, we are up to 87.5% of those 12 and up with at least one dose, and 73.8% of those 12 and up being fully vaccinated. In terms of our cases, it is difficult to say whether we are reaching our peak or plateauing, or whether we are still going up. Remember that those last 5 days will continue to get updated as more case data comes in, and as you can see, we remain higher than we were in the last summer surge. And as far as hospitalizations, although they've come down a bit since I reported last week from 208, they are still higher than they were in last summer's surge. And that was at a time when we, of course, did not have a vaccine at all. And so these elevated hospitalizations are really a result of the remaining unvaccinated by and far. About 98% are among those who remain unvaccinated. And so briefly on the variants, this is showing the state of California website on the different variants, and as you can see, the Delta variant, which we had 0 cases back in March, by April we were at 2%, and in May, which was at the point that we actually first detected it at our testing site in East Oakland, and at that point we were around 5-6% statewide. Now we're up to 98% of the variants that are being sequenced in the state of California are the Delta variant. It has really taken over here and across the country. And even though we still are only sequencing a small percent, this is really a sample that I think shows us what it is that we are dealing with. And what it doesn't show is one variant that many of us have heard about called the Lambda variant. And we've been keeping an eye on that variant because it's a mutation. It has a mutation on it that's concerning. And it looks like it helps it to evade or avoid our vaccines, which is, of course, one of the main things we're really concerned about as this pandemic continues to evolve. And so overall, there have been about 700 Lambda cases identified in the United States. But remember, the United States is only sequencing maybe 1 or 2% of its samples. We've got over 150 sequenced here in California. We might be sequencing about 7-8%. And we've also identified some Lambda right here in Alameda County. So one of the concerns and one of the reasons why you don't see it at all here is because the CDC has not indicated that it is a variant of concern or a variant of even of interest for that matter. The World Health Organization has classified it as a variant of interest. Remember that it took hold in some parts of the world and actually caused a lot of sickness and a lot of death in places like Peru. And so the World Health Organization certainly is having to have a much broader view on the fact that it is of interest to them. But still, we're all keeping an eye on it. We are sequencing all of our positive specimens at our East Oakland testing site, and we will report back if we do detect Lambda or any other new variants that we haven't been seeing that may be of interest or concern. And we haven't seen it yet, but remember that sequencing data does lag a little bit behind because that process takes a bit of time. It doesn't change anything about the treatment or what we're going to do about it, but it is certainly important for us to keep an eye on things so that we can try our best to at least stay a step ahead of it. Now, why did it take hold in other parts of the world? Those are the kind of things that scientists are really looking at right now, and maybe because other parts of the world, apart from just being less vaccinated, the main vaccines that they have are also very different than ours, and they may not be provoking as robust of an immune response as the ones that we have here in the United States. Also, the strains compete with one another. And so the fact that Delta has sort of completely outcompeted that UK variant, which we were a little nervous about for a little while there, even the California variants, which actually share a mutation with the Lambda variant, those all got pretty much wiped out by the Delta variant. And so we just don't know how these strains behave with one another. Right now, it does not appear to be out competing Delta or taking over. It does not appear to be as contagious as the Delta variant. So it is possible that although this Delta variant is really wreaking havoc and causing us a lot of problems, it is possible that it outcompetes something that appears to be more virulent, which the Lambda strain appears to be, or appears to evade our vaccines more than the Delta. And that is what it looks like with Lambda. And again, we'll be keeping an eye on this and reporting out more as more becomes known. But for now, we are primarily dealing with Delta, and that really has been the reason for a number of the new recommendations that I will get to in just a second regarding the vaccination. But first, the biggest news on the vaccination front is that Pfizer has received its full biologics license from the FDA as of August 23rd. And this was a biologic license application that was submitted to the FDA on May 7th, and this was based on the original emergency use authorization, which was for those 16 and up. So the full license is now granted for those 16 and up. So we're still waiting on the 12 to 15-year-olds. Remember, that was approved much later, and so it will take more time. And so it's important to note that this approval, which is, I'm told, hundreds of thousands of pages of documents and data, this is longer term data on that original clinical trial. So there was no new studies involved here. This is really part of the approval, is to have a longer term data, because remember, the emergency use was granted with 2 months of data, and the full license needs 6 months of data, and is primarily looking at safety concerns. So we already knew that this was going to be granted because we have 6 months of data, and we have seen a pretty remarkable safety profile of the Pfizer vaccine and all the vaccines. And so there's really there was no surprise here. There's no reason to think we're not going to see the same thing with Moderna. Moderna didn't submit its license until June, so it was a few weeks behind, a month behind. And so if the FDA is sort of on the same timeline as it was for the Pfizer vaccine, then we might expect Moderna to get its full approval after a few weeks. But again, no reason to think it won't achieve that. Because the safety has been remarkable, really, with all of the vaccines. And so what does it mean that we've got full approval by the FDA? And so one thing it means is that it really opens the door for mandates. And so companies, corporations, government agencies have already actually said that once the full approval is granted, that they will begin to require it for their employees. They could start to require it for patrons. This really gives more flexibility. And although there was already some flexibility in place, I think that this really makes it so that mandates would not be out of the ordinary at all. They would be very much in line with what we've done in the past. And this includes for school. So again, we're only talking about the 16 and up age group right now. But it is possible that this could become a requirement, just like other vaccines are a requirement for in-person school. The other thing that this allows is that Pfizer can now continue to make this vaccine even after the public health emergency is over. So remember, the public health emergency was declared in January of 2020. It's been renewed a number of times, most recently last month in July. But at whatever point that we're no longer in a public health emergency, Pfizer has the green light to continue manufacturing it because, again, the previous EUA was in light of the emergency and would expire upon the ending of the public health emergency. So now that is no longer a concern for Pfizer for those 16 and up. Now the drug company can charge more for it if they want to. they can begin advertising if they want to. And they are, in fact, going to begin marketing under this brand name that I'm not going to try to pronounce. And it's just important to know that marketing is prohibited under emergency use. And now it won't be because it has a full license. And so we can expect to see those lovely drug commercials on the COVID vaccine, which will undoubtedly reach more people with information about the vaccine. We know that Pfizer is very skilled at advertising, like most of the pharmaceutical companies. In fact, in 2019, they spent $1.9 billion in direct to consumer advertising. So I am sure that we will soon be seeing Pfizer vaccine commercials. One other thing that we hope will happen due to the full approval is that we'll have increased confidence. So we know we've all heard time and time again, it's not approved, it's not fully approved. I want it to have the full approval. And so now we've got it. There was a recent study from the Kaiser Family Foundation that showed that 3 out of 10 or 30% of adults said that full approval would make them more likely to get vaccinated. So we expect to see folks coming out to get vaccinated as a result of this full approval. And last but not least, physicians can now do some off-label use of the vaccine. And I'll talk a little bit about why that might be significant in a moment. But in general, physicians are allowed to do off-label use within, obviously, their clinical judgment with anything that is fully approved. And so as it relates to those 16 and up, physicians do have a little more discretion than they did before, researchers as well. And so this does open the door a little bit for some additional wiggle room on what to recommend as it relates to the Pfizer COVID vaccine. And I'll say that Pfizer submitted data, booster data, to the FDA on August 16th. The trials are not complete. Nonetheless, the White House came out and recommended boosters for everyone starting in September. They've said 8 months after you've received your primary series, you could be eligible. And this came just days after the official approval, and that means FDA, Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, and CDC all vetted and approved an additional dose for those who are immunocompromised. So that is formally approved. However, this announcement around a booster dose was announced by the White House, but it hasn't been officially endorsed by the FDA, the ACIP, or the CDC. And we haven't really had the opportunity to review whatever data is underlying this particular announcement that came out of the White House. Of course, Pfizer, can submit whatever it wants to the FDA. It still needs to be reviewed. Also, Pfizer has made a number of announcements about boosters over the past several months. Of course, it has its shareholders to please, and of course, it is doing what it can to stay a step ahead. But we really do rely on particular regulatory bodies and oversight entities to be the ones to come out with the evidence and the information. Having said that, with this full approval, you now have physicians that have a bit more leeway. And so certainly great time to have a conversation with your physician. And of course, if you don't have one, please get one. So some of the things that I am still concerned about and waiting for are recommendations around the J&J and recommendations for our elders. And so we still don't have formal recommendations for those two groups. And so I think that these two groups are the ones in particular that I would suggest speaking to your physician about whether you should get an additional dose after your primary series. And some of this may be a judgment call. It may depend on how long ago you got your primary series. People who are elder are not by definition considered immunocompromised. However, we know that the immune response mounted is not as strong as younger people. We also know that many of the more serious breakthroughs that have led to hospitalization and death have been not only in immunocompromised, but also in the elderly. So again, if you're young, you're healthy, no immune issues, that is one calculation and one conversation. However, if you are elder, you were probably eligible, well, you were eligible early on, and so you may have received your primary series early on. So you really might be at that point where it might be advisable to get your additional dose. If you receive J&J as a primary series, once again, and I want to say here, we're not seeing more failures with J&J. The breakthroughs that we're seeing are pretty even across the board. It's really difficult to draw a lot of conclusions about the percentage effectiveness because we're really looking at small samples. When they give percents, it's not necessarily going to be an adequate indicator of what it is we're seeing right here, and with the populations that we're seeing. However, having said that, if you receive one J&J, that is the primary series. And so after 28 days, should you be getting an additional dose, I would say if you're in that immunocompromised category, that would seem perfectly reasonable, and definitely a conversation to have with your physician, who may now feel a little more comfortable knowing that they can do essentially off-label use with the Pfizer. And so most experts are saying that if it was them and they were to get another dose, they would not do the J&J again. They would do an mRNA. But this is something we're still waiting to see. So I'll give you my list of things I'm waiting to see. One is a mix and match studies. The mix and match studies are happening in other parts of the world and also right here in the United States. And there are some early indicators that you may get a better boost. It's called a heterologous prime boost if you get a different type than you got the first time. But we don't have enough data to really make those recommendations, and those are not the recommendations. Right now, the CDC says get the same mRNA variety that you got the first time, and they've said nothing about the J&J. So it is leaving a little bit of room for interpretation for your physician. Again, have that conversation. And I'm also still waiting and hoping for a approved test, a test of immunity. How can we see beyond just the antibodies if we've mounted a good response and if we need another dose, if we need more of an immune boost against SARS-CoV-2. Right now, we don't know. So everything that we're hearing are sort of these estimates about 8 months out. And again, without having the benefit of knowing what all data informed this announcement from the White House, I am certainly going to be waiting to hear the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices take up this issue and weigh out the evidence. So I'll be looking forward to seeing that. The other thing I'm looking forward to seeing are variant-specific vaccines. So BioNTech, which is Pfizer's partner, they are in clinical trials currently on a Delta-specific vaccine, and don't know when that'll be ready for use or available. But remember that with the mRNA vaccine, we have the platform available, and so all we need is the gene sequence, and it's almost like a plug and play. And so this notion of having variant-specific vaccines is very much one of the advantages that we've said from the beginning from using the mRNA platform. So we will definitely be keeping an eye out for that. Of course, we are also waiting for approval for our youngsters. And so the 0 to 11-year-olds, we are still waiting for the trials. It is looking like perhaps by the end of the year, we'll have something for our 6 to 11-year-olds. May take a little longer for our 0 to 5-year-olds. And of course, again, like I mentioned, for the 12 to 15-year-olds, we are still under the emergency use. So there should not be any off-label use in that particular age group. So just by way of recap, additional dose, that is the dose after the primary vaccine series when we think that maybe your immune response was not sufficient. So you should be talking to your doctor or going ahead and getting your additional dose if you are in these immune compromised groups. I talked about this in great detail in last week's People's Health Briefing. Booster dose. Now, this is the one that since last week's health briefing, the White House has come out and said boosters for everyone starting in September, somewhere around 8 months after your primary series. Again, would love to see the data, and I will be updating here after the appropriate bodies take this issue up. But a booster dose is basically a dose after the primary series when we think that your initial response was fine at the time, but now that it has likely waned. And I will say that when we talk about a booster dose, we're not just talking about your response has waned anymore. We're talking about the fact that we have a variant now that is not the same. This is not the same strain as the one that the original vaccine was made against. And so it is really a combination of waning immunity as well as a higher failure rate as a result of the Delta variant. And so I am just going to take this moment to say that we all have heard about cases of COVID-19 in people who have been fully vaccinated. The vast majority of them do fine. They don't feel fine. They don't feel good at all. It's still scary. And most importantly, it could still be spread to people who are unvaccinated. We believe and have a lot of evidence to suggest that the rate of spreading it around is lower than unvaccinated people, but still, we are not at herd immunity. Not sure if we ever will be, but we're certainly not there now. And so, because of that, we're still in an evolving pandemic. And so, therefore, vaccinated or not, I do think it's important that we all be careful, and that even if you're vaccinated, that you're not spending a great deal of time indoors, particularly with people who are unvaccinated, because we are responding to quite a number of positive cases who were at gatherings, at parties, and both vaccinated and unvaccinated are contracting COVID. More unvaccinated, and the unvaccinated ones are the ones that are more likely to get very sick, the ones that are more likely to go to the hospital, the ones that are more likely to die. But guess what? All of them who get it could spread it to someone who then, in turn, could do poorly and could die. And so, certainly, if you are vaccinated, please continue to be careful, especially if you live with unvaccinated people, especially if you go around people who may not have mounted a good response to the vaccine and you're going to be around them unmasked. So, please continue to exercise caution. And, again, one of my favorite infographics here, because it's so simple. Open airspace is better than enclosed space. Further away is better than close together. Shorter periods of time are better than longer periods of time, particularly as it relates to indoor crowded spaces. Ventilation is absolutely key. And if you must be around people like members of the public for any prolonged period of time, please do consider the N95 mask. It's really the only one that's actually going to filter out those particles. Not the most comfortable thing in the world, but if you've got to travel, if you've got to be in contact with the public, if you've got to be in an indoor space with people whose vaccination status you don't know, then please do consider wearing an N95 mask. If you believe you were exposed, isolate yourself, get tested in 3 to 5 days, and continue to isolate until you get your results. If you get COVID symptoms, get tested right away, even if you are fully vaccinated. Remember, the sooner you get tested, the better, especially if you are in a high-risk category. Please inquire about monoclonal antibody treatment if you test positive. Also, don't forget, call your close contacts, people that you've been around since you might have contracted it, and let them know this is not the time to be bashful. You need to make that phone call. I know it's not the greatest call. People dread it. But this is a highly contagious virus. It's nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed about. It is happening to people, and you could prevent a horrible outbreak by letting everyone know, because you don't know what they're then going out and doing. So please encourage your close contacts to also get tested right away and let them know about monoclonal antibodies. Let them know that there might be a treatment that could be life-saving if they get tested in time. And for everyone, please to optimize your immune functioning, have good nutrition, get your exercise, take a multivitamin supplement, consider additional vitamin D supplementation, manage your stress, and get a good night's sleep. That concludes today's People's Health Briefing. Thank you for joining us. Please tune in next Tuesday at 10. See you then.